Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training, and in this video I'm going to look at the new features that were added in EDIUS in 10.1 and 10.2. 10.2 came out in about the middle of May, 10.1 was a bit earlier in the year. The main differences that we've got in this update are to do with the background rendering that was added in EDIUS 10. In EDIUS 10.1 they added in the ability to render and add to timeline, and in 10.2 they revamped the interface of the EDIUS job monitor, the thing that tells you what's going on in the background. So first of all we're going to have a look at those, and then we're going to have a look at some of the other little differences that have come in those two versions. So one of the changes they've made is they have revamped the look of the EDIUS job monitor. It was running as a separate program, just call it up here from the start menu, which you could pull up and see a list of things happening. What they've done is revamp the look of it. Apparently they've made it into an HTML based file, and they've made a version that you can see inside of EDIUS. So if you look up here next to my bins, I've got an extra tab here called Job, which gives me exactly that same job monitor but inside EDIUS. And like all the other windows, it's a floating window, but you can dock it. So I'm going to dock it right next to the others, so I've got the job sitting up there. The one inside of EDIUS shows you any jobs that you're doing on this particular project. The one outside of EDIUS shows you all of the jobs that you've been doing on every project. So it still works the same way it did in version 10, it just looks slightly different, and you've got a version that you can tab and stick inside of EDIUS, which is nice. The other major thing is render and add to timeline. Now this is something that was in previous versions of EDIUS but was not in EDIUS 10, and in 10.1 they put it back in. What it does is you take a clip on the timeline you need to render, and you choose render and add to timeline, it makes it up and then it puts it over the top of the other clips. Now I find this particularly useful with effects that really can't be played back in real time. So all your basic stuff like EDIUS color correction and so on you can generally play back in real time. But there are some things you can't. On this clip I'm using a plugin called Neat Video, which is a good plugin for cleaning up clips, getting rid of noise. So this clip here is actually a bit of high 8 which I have upscaled to high definition. It was filmed in low light, so actually it's a little bit fuzzy. And if I turn off the Neat Video and start playing it, you'll notice all this horrible fuzz absolutely everywhere. The sort of thing that high 8 did in terribly low light. It looks really awful. Now I find the best way to clean that up is to use Neat Video. Obviously you have to buy the plugin separately. I put it onto the clip, got it to analyze it, and now it's cleaned up all of that noise. And I can start playing it back, and you notice I don't get any of that horrible fuzz. My overlay here looks a bit blocky, but it actually looks better than that on the final results. But mainly it's got rid of all of that horrible noisy fuzz, and it's cleaned it up really well. And I've tried lots of different types of noise reduction plugins. Neat Video is by far the one that works the best. For example, I've been using the one inside of Resolve, and it's pretty good, but not nearly as good as Neat Video. Only trouble is, Neat Video takes a lot of effort. It will use your graphics card to do the work. I've got an NVIDIA 1660 graphics card in here, which is very good. And even if I set it up to use that properly, you'll notice it's still not playing it back in real time. My buffer's down to 0, it's gone red. This thing needs rendering. And the problem is, if I then start to add a bit of color correction to that, and I want to see that playing back in real time, I've got to render it, or if I want to add any other effects, I have to keep rendering and rendering, because the Neat Video means that it just simply can't play it back in real time. What I really want to do is bake that noise reduction in, and then start putting effects on the baked in version. Now you could do it by going print to file, exporting a file, bringing it back into EDIUS, putting it onto the timeline, or you can use render and add to timeline, which basically does all of that in one click. So what I do is I go up to render, choose render and add to timeline. EDIUS automatically puts in a blank clip. Now it's come up like that because the clip hasn't been made yet, but now it's going off and making it in the background. And this is the major difference between this and previous versions of EDIUS. In previous versions, I'd have to wait for that to happen. In EDIUS X, I can set it going and then carry on working. If I want to see what's happening there, I can come up to the job monitor. Now, the job monitor is not showing me anything right now, and that's because if you go to the display types drop down, it's only set to show me things that are going on in exporting or batch exporting. It's not showing me any of these things. If I tick partial rendering, which is what this thing comes under, you can see there it is, it's chugging away making that file on the timeline. But like I said, because it's in the background, I can go off and do other things inside of EDIUS and add clips on and go on to the next one or whatever. that's done, you notice immediately as it's done, this clip on the timeline got replaced with the rendered version, and now I can play it back in real time, and I get a much nicer looking clip. And that's great, the ability to render and add to timeline. It's just a little time saver. Like I said before, in EDIUS 10 you'd had to export, then bring the clip in, then stick it onto the timeline in the right place, and so on. With this, render and add to timeline, bosh, all done in one go. And I do that with any effect that's really hard work. Another thing I did was a computer screen which had multiple layers of graphics on there, and it really couldn't cope with that, so I rendered and added to timeline lots of bits of that. The format it gets rendered in is whatever is set in your project settings. So if you go up to the project settings and look at render format, it's in that. And if you're in a project with an alpha channel and you're using a render format that's got alpha channels, then for example you could render a title and it would bake in the alpha channel of the title. That clip actually gets saved on the hard drive next to your project. The easiest way for me to find that is to just add it to the bin, right click Explorer, and up it pops as to where the clip is. And here you can see under my EDIUS project folder, I now have a new folder called Render and Paste. And if I go into that, you can see I've got video clips that have been rendered. This one is called what? 00007CE7 blah blah. I mean, you don't really have to worry about that because it'll just link to it automatically. But that's great. It's added in the ability to render and add to timeline. Like I say, the job monitor itself has undergone a revamp. So if I bring up the external job monitor here, you can see it looks pretty similar to the internal one, except it will show me things from other projects if I'd done a list of other things from other projects. You can choose up here whether you want to show ones that are in progress, ones that are finished, ones that have got problems and so on. Up under the display types, you can choose to show all these different things. So if I tick everything, these are all from different projects. So are things like displaying the waveform cache of a particular piece of video, my render and paste. Obviously any of these things will pop up here, but I can quite happily just tick it and only leave it showing exports, which is one of the things I particularly like to leave. Now you've got exactly the same thing in the job monitor inside of EDIUS, apart from the fact it only shows you stuff to do with this particular project. It's got all the same kind of things as you had in the other version, it just looks slightly nicer. There are a couple of other additions to the job monitor apart from the revamp. If I go export to file, we now have a new tick box, add to bin, which wasn't there in previous versions. So if I tick that and then choose to export it, and I'll give it a name, and yep, off it goes. It starts rendering, popping up in that monitor there, and popping up in the external job monitor. EDIUS 10, if you wanted to get back into EDIUS, you would have to select it, right click and add to bin. Now because I've got that tick box, it's actually put it into the bin automatically. There's that clip that it made up. And that's the thing that will actually stay ticked once you've ticked it. So if that is ticked, every time you go and make another clip, it'll pop up in the bin as well. Of course, untick it, it'll remember that you've unticked it. But that, again, nice little option, brings it back into the bin like it used to. Another thing that Grass Valley have added is to do with converting clips inside the bin. Again, this is something EDIUS has always been able to do. If you've got a bunch of clips and want to change them to a different format, you can just select them, right click and choose Convert. You can see you've got File, File Batch or Alpha Mat. This is very useful, taking a bunch of source files and then converting them into another format that's easier to use. Say if you've got some stuff which is really hard to use, H.265 or maybe Blackmagic cinema camera footage, you want to make it usable, you can just do that and it will make it into a nice usable format for you. Again, with previous versions of EDIUS, that would tie up the computer and you wouldn't be able to get on with anything else. Now this is also a background job, so it's added to the job monitor and it does it that way. What you do is you just say Convert, File, choose the format that you want and then go Export. There's a huge list of formats here. Now previously you could only do variations of Grass Valley HQ and uncompressed. Now you can do lots and lots of other stuff. You can see this clip here is an original DV clip. I can convert it to DV, HQ, HQX, H.264, all of this lot are things that I can actually convert it to. Just like the print to file dialog box, if I go to say a format like HDV, which doesn't happen to support what that is. That clip is actually a 25p standard definition file. That's not something HDV can do. So I don't get an option of a preset there, but I can tick enable conversion and then convert it to something which is actually HDV if I want to. So you've got lots and lots of different formats that you can choose from, and you just choose it, say export, tell it where to go, and then it's going to ask me for each individual file. And there we go, those 3 are now going to get converted to something else. So what happens is it then pops in 3 little files. It's doing it so quickly I'm hardly having a chance to tell you, but there you see it's popped in 3 different little files there, and each one is now being converted to my format. Let's go into here and have a look at the convert files. There we are, all 3 of them got converted. So it makes a little placeholder, then it converts them, then it puts the converted file in its place, and now those have now been converted to Apple ProRes, which is what I happen to choose. The major difference between choosing convert file and convert file batch is if I choose convert file, I get the option of choosing the format I want for each file. If I can use convert file batch, then I choose a format, give it a name, click save, and then it just chooses the same format for all 3 of them. Bosh, puts it in there, all 3 of them getting the same format, all 3 of them automatically being named. So that's the only real difference between the 2 things. Convert file just will mean that you choose it individually and you name it individually. File batch means that you choose one thing and then it names them all automatically. Probably file batch is what you're going to do if you're doing lots and lots of clips. Now I happen to do a lot of 3D animation, and I generate all my animation as image sequences. So if I go and grab one of those image sequences off, so you can see here I have an image sequence animation, which if I tick sequence clip, it's going to bring that in and combine that into one file of something like 1,000 still images. Once I've got that in there, it's actually a lot more convenient for me just to say convert file and then change that into a video clip rather than an image sequence. It's a lot easier to manage the media. If you're moving projects around, it's an awful lot easier to move around one file than an image sequence. So I do that with lots of image sequences that I bring in. You'll notice with an image sequence I have less options than I did with the video clip. It's only giving me options here which will keep up the kind of color space that I've got. So my original clip was just an 8-bit video clip. This is an image sequence which is uncompressed 24-bit color, so I've only got options that will really keep that up for me. But I've still got more options than I used to have in the old days, and it'll do it for me in the background. These little icons here which show the conversion, they do change colour. So you notice it was grey, then it went green, and green meant that it was in progress and being rendering. Yellow, if you ever see yellow, means that I've gone to the job monitor and I've paused it. Because if you're doing something in the background, sometimes it can hold up your whole editing program a bit. Maybe if you want all your computer resources working on the thing you're editing right now and not background rendering, you can pause the background rendering. Well, if you did that and it was in progress, it would have gone yellow. And if there's an error, then it'll go red. So you'll see there's a little file in there and it actually will be red instead of grey, telling you something went wrong with it. You also probably noticed that when I did a render and add to bin, that I also get the same thing here. Once I've chosen to add it to bin, I get this little clip thumbnail in here waiting for the thing to be done. Again, green whilst it's being worked on, showing the percentage there. Can also pop to the job monitor and see how it's doing here. But if I've chosen to add it to the bin, then I get exactly the same icon as I did when I was doing the batch conversion in the bin. If I pause that job, go back to the bin, you can see it's yellow because it's been paused. Let's go and finish it off. Again, nice little additions to the background rendering and the job monitor. The background for conversion in the bin was added in 10.2, as well as the rework of the job monitor and the fact you can dock it inside of EDIUS. That's all part of 10.2. The render and add to timeline, that was added in 10.1. On the export side, we've also got another nice couple of things added in. So if I go up to print file, you will notice down here that under audio, I can now export to an MPEG-3 file. Something we haven't been able to do in EDIUS basically ever. I mean, you could by buying an extra plugin. Well, now you can actually do it straight off the timeline. Yay! Obviously, you've got options for bitrate, quality, all that kind of thing that you expect with MP3 files. Also in 10.2, we've added in the ability to export to H.264, so basically an MPEG-4 file, using NVIDIA hardware. They added in the ability to do H.265 with NVIDIA hardware in version 10. In 10.2, we can now do H.264 as well. Now on my system, I happen to have QuickSync, so I've now got the option of 3 things. I've got QuickSync, I've got just using the EDIUS encoder, or I've got using NVIDIA. Still think QuickSync is the fastest, and on my nice fast system, the EDIUS built encoder, which I think does very good quality at very low bit rates, is actually pretty fast anyway. But now you can use your NVIDIA hardware as well, which is good for people who don't have QuickSync and want to get things out in a hurry. Pretty simple, you just choose that, you export, give it a file name, set your bit rates up, and bosh, go and export it. With the NVIDIA encoder, you've got the option of normal or super fine quality. Obviously you can adjust the bit rate, do variable bit rate, all the sort of things you'd expect. On my particular graphics card, I can't do 10-bit. I also, with the NVIDIA encoder, can't do things like interlaced MPEG-4 files. Now, I don't really want to do interlaced MPEG-4 files, but I can do that using the Canopus encoder. But the advantage is that compared to the built-in one, it's going to be faster. So with the built-in one, obviously these are all the options you'll be used to, but I do have the option of doing 10-bit. I can do interlaced, but it's going to be a bit slower. But I do find I really like the quality of the built-in encoder, and this is something which they improved over the life of EDIUS. So in the earlier versions of EDIUS 8, it wasn't that good. It wasn't until the later end of EDIUS 8 that they really did a dramatic improvement to the quality, and it's got better through 9 and 10. So I'm really happy with the software encoder. The QuickSync encoder is good because it's fast. Not showing up on my computer right now because I don't happen to have a monitor connected up to it, but I could use QuickSync. That is really still nice and fast, but not so good at lower bit rates. So you've now got another option, and particularly for people that don't have QuickSync, it just gives you a faster way of getting stuff out. We've got another couple of nice little options that have been added. So suppose you put some markers in on the timeline or on a clip. You've now got a little thumbnail that goes with the marker. That I find particularly useful on source clips, because I might go through and put little markers on my source clips to denote the start of scenes or shots that I want, and it shows me a little thumbnail of them up there, which is nice. They've also added a nice option to do with ProRes RAW. I'm afraid I don't have any to show you, but you can actually set the default color space for ProRes RAW, as opposed to letting it guess it for you. Most of the times EDIUS does guess the color space of clips correctly, but sometimes it doesn't, so it's nice to be able to set a default to what you want. And you can import XAVC 8K footage. Mink has had a nice couple of changes as well. For a start, there's the ability to turn off this panel up here. This panel is if you're going to select a couple of clips here and then import them, it's going to let you set where to import it and so on. A lot of the time I don't actually get Mink to move clips around for me, I just want to register it to the library. I don't really need that, it's wasted space. So if I come up to settings and then import, I can hide that panel. Just gives me a bit more space, which I find incredibly useful. If you look at little thumbnails, we do now have the option to show the time code on the thumbnails. And the other thing is, when it comes to a storyboard, if you go to export the storyboard, you've now got the option to export it in ProRes. Before we could only do H.264, now we can do HQ and ProRes. A lot more useful than just doing H.264. H.264 is a very lossy format. It's great for final files, not so great if you want to take something, strip it down a bit and then use it somewhere else. Well, now you can do that by using either HQ or ProRes. So a nice couple of changes there for Mink as well. So that's a roundup of new features that were in EDIUS 10.1 and 10.2. There will be more coming out in due course, and I'll do videos to go with them. If you haven't yet upgraded to EDIUS 10, in addition to all the stuff I've mentioned here, don't forget you've also got background export and rendering, improved support for VST plugins. With older versions of EDIUS, you'd get an audio delay with various audio plugins. Now you don't get that anymore. It works a lot better. You've got motion tracking in the layouter. So now you can take a title or an effect or some other thing and make it follow an object on screen, not just track things in the mask editor. The draft preview option is now available in the Pro version as well as in the workgroup version. And of course you've got all the extra stuff that came with it as well. So for instance, there's the Acorn audio plugins for noise reduction, reverb reduction, compressors and so on. There's ProDAD Vitascene 4 and also NewBlue Titler 7. So all those extra things that you get with it as well. If you want to upgrade, you can buy the upgrade through my website. When you do so, you get it from the EU distributors, so you're actually buying in euro, but I'll give you help if you have problems setting it up and installing it. Don't forget you can get support from me by emailing or ringing on the phone number on the website, and you can order my full EDIUS tutorial, which I'm in the process of updating to have this new stuff with EDIUS 10, as well as revamping some of the older chapters. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. Don't forget to like, subscribe and all the other stuff you do on YouTube. And I'll see you next time.